Welcome to the twisted world of Mr. Beastly, where nightmares become reality, and reality becomes a nightmare. Today's story is about a man who finds a magical mirror in a cabin in the woods. Anyways, without further ado, let's get this story rolling, shall we? I've always had a knack for finding strange and unusual things. I guess you could say it's a gift, or maybe it's a curse. Either way, it's led me to some pretty dark places over the years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found that day. It was a cold winter morning, and I was out for a walk in the woods behind my house. I'd been exploring the area for years, but I'd never seen anything like it before. There was a clearing in the woods, and in the center of the clearing was a strange old cabin. It was made of rotting wood and rusty metal, and it looked like it hadn't been inhabited in years. I was immediately drawn to the cabin. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I had to go inside. I approached the cabin slowly and cautiously. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and dusty, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. I could barely see anything, but I could tell that the cabin was filled with junk. There was old furniture, piles of dusty books, and all sorts of other strange and mysterious objects. I started to explore the cabin, carefully picking my way through the junk. I found all sorts of interesting things, including an old Victrola record player, a collection of antique weapons, and a stack of old photographs. As I was exploring, I noticed a small door in the back of the cabin. I opened the door and stepped inside. I found myself in a small dark room. In the center of the room was a table, and on the table was a strange object. It was a black mirror. I had never seen anything like it before. The mirror was perfectly black and it had no reflection. I was immediately drawn to the mirror. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I had to look into it. I slowly approached the mirror and leaned in close. I looked into the black surface, and for a moment I didn't see anything. But then I started to see something. At first, it was just a blur, but then it became clearer. I was looking at myself, but it wasn't me from the present day. It was me from the future. The man in the mirror was older and wiser. He had a long beard and a kind face. He smiled at me and said, "Hello, my son. I've been waiting for you." I was shocked and confused. I didn't know what to say. The man continued, "You have a great gift, my son, but you must be careful. The things you see in this mirror can be dangerous." I didn't understand what he meant. "Just remember," he said, "the future is not set in stone. You have the power to change it." And then the mirror went black. I stepped back from the mirror. I didn't know what to think. Was that really me from the future? Was he trying to warn me about something? I didn't know, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't like it. I left the cabin and went back home. I tried to forget about what I had seen, but I couldn't. The image of the man in the mirror was burned into my mind. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the man in the mirror and his warning. Finally, I got up and went back to the cabin. I had to see the mirror again. I arrived at the cabin in the middle of the night. The moon was full and the woods were bathed in eerie moonlight. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and silent. I made my way to the back of the cabin and opened the door to the small room with the mirror. The mirror was still there, sitting on the table in the center of the room. I slowly approached the mirror and leaned in close. I looked into the black surface. At first I didn't see anything, but then I started to see something. It was the man in the mirror. He smiled at me and said, "Hello, my son. I've been waiting for you." "What do you want?" I asked. "I want to help you," he said. "I want to teach you how to use your gift." "What gift?" I asked. "The gift of foresight," he said. "You can see the future." I shook my head. "I don't believe you." "It's true," he said. "You saw yourself from the future." I thought for a moment. "But why?" I asked. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you need my help," he said. "There is a great darkness coming, and you are the only one who can stop it." I laughed. "Me? Stop a great darkness? How could I do that? You have the power, he said, but you must learn how to use it. I didn't know what to think. I was still skeptical, but there was something about the man in the mirror that I trusted. How can you teach me? I asked. You must come to the mirror every night, he said, and you must look into the future. You must see what is coming, I nodded. Okay, I said, I will, I said. The man in the mirror smiled. Good, he said. Now go home, get some rest. You will need it for what is to come. I turned and left the cabin. I walked back through the woods, my mind racing. Was the man in the mirror telling the truth? Did I really have the power to see the future? And if so, what was coming? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. I went home and got into bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man in the mirror and his warning. Finally, I got up and went back to the cabin. I arrived at the cabin in the middle of the night. The moon was full and the woods were bathed in eerie moonlight. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and silent. I made my way to the back of the cabin and opened the door to the small room with the mirror. The mirror was still there, sitting on the table in the center of the room. I slowly approached the mirror and leaned in close. I looked into the black surface. At first I didn't see anything, but then I started to see something. I was looking at a city in ruins. Buildings were collapsed and fires were burning everywhere. I saw people running and screaming. They were terrified. I saw a dark figure standing in the center of the city. It was tall and imposing, and it was surrounded by a swirling black mist. The figure raised its hand, and a beam of black light shot out from its palm. The beam struck one of the buildings, and it instantly collapsed. I saw more beams of black light shooting out from the figure's hand. Buildings were collapsing all around me. I screamed and looked away from the mirror. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I turned and ran out of the cabin. I ran through the woods. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew one thing for sure. It was bad, something very bad. I ran all the way back to my house and didn't stop until I had locked the door behind me. I collapsed into bed and closed my eyes. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. The image of the city in ruins was burned into my mind, and the image of the dark figure was even more terrifying. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop what was coming. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to try. I woke up the next morning feeling drained. I hadn't slept at all, but I couldn't get the image of the city in ruins out of my head. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. I thought about what the man in the mirror had said. He had told me that I had the power to stop the darkness, but I didn't know how. I decided to go back to the cabin and see if the man in the mirror could give me some more answers. I arrived at the cabin in the early afternoon. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. It was a beautiful day, but I was filled with dread. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and silent. I made my way to the back of the cabin and opened the door to the small room with the mirror. The mirror was still there, sitting on the table in the center of the room. I slowly approached the mirror and leaned in close. I looked into the black surface. At first I didn't see anything, but then I started to see something. It was the man in the mirror. He smiled at me and said, "Hello, my son, I'm glad you came back." "I need your help," I said. "I don't know how to stop the darkness." "You must learn to control your gift," he said. "You must learn to see the future clearly." "But how do I do that?" I asked. "You must practice," he said. "You must come to the mirror every night and look into the future. You must see what is coming." As many of you probably already know, TikTok limits vids to 10 minutes. There is still more to this story, so the rest of the story will be uploaded immediately behind this one.